of the environmental theme. So it's
yes. So no, you got my material there with the origins of Pokemon. But do you know what Pokemon was called originally?
it's a good question. The original Japanese.
It's a bit of a trick question. So it's obviously short for pocket monster, but before that, first conceived, I think it was you mentioned Satoshi Tajiri. He was going to call it capsule monster, I think, which is a little bit less catchy. So he was inspired, as you said, by being collecting bugs in his garden, but he was also inspired by Ultraman. You might be familiar with the sort of big fighting robot franchise in Japan, because the monsters or the robots, the fighting things, were stored inside little capsules. So he kind of combined his love of both to great success. Of course, I think originally it wasn't. Nintendo didn't say yes to it originally. I think a lot of people assume it is a Nintendo game, but it's originally a Game Freak game. Game Freak being the company that pitched it, and then for distribution in the West, primarily, I think the Pokemon Company was formed, and Game Freak and Nintendo are both investors in that or shareholders in that. So it's quite a complicated business, isn't it, Tim?
And of course, one of the things about this particular game, from what little I know of it, is that it's set in the Galar region, which is supposed to be in some ways an analog of Britain, although I know there are arguments over the extent to which it's an analog of Britain or of particular influences of Britain. And what could be more British than a battle between a rabbit and a sheep, as we are seeing here in the I think that it's interesting the way in which they've anthropomorphized all the different Pokemon and sort of animals that are representative of those you might find in the countryside, but also in the cities as well.
Yeah, I think for me the realism is dampened by the fact it's not raining. Well, especially as I believe we start in Scotland allegedly. Is that right?
Well, yeah, there's an argument as to whether we start in Scotland or we start in the north of England with a character who has Scottish influences, but just by the shape of the map and that. But I think I know weather's been a feature of some Pokemon games, which may be a feature of this game as well. But you can only catch certain Pokemon in certain weathers and that.
Yes, I remember they introduced the day-night cycle in the second or third generation Pokemon, which had a similar idea. There were certain nocturnal Pokemon, so perhaps yes. Certainly doesn't look like Scotland is where I'm going to venture.
Well, or alternatively, climate change has even more advanced in the Pokemon universe than it is here, so which is a slightly worrying thought. Though it's always appeared rather utopian in its juxtaposition of nature and a technologically advanced society just happily coexisting for the most part, until you get into some of the movies and some of those moments of various teams with increasingly strange sounding names that want to exploit the natural resources.
Yeah, I think that's that connects nicely with the environmental theme, doesn't it? What's interesting is that all the Pokemon have a home habitat, which I guess would be one of the first, could be one of the first casualties of climate change. That habitats start to shrink. So I suspect the fire Pokemon will be okay.
That's
water Pokemon will be fine because the water levels keep rising, so they get bigger habitats.
True, yes. I don't know if you caught that, but Eva has observed that the water Pokemon will also be okay as the sea levels rise. This is taking a bit of a grim turn.
Yes, it's I'm yeah, indeed. The rival inevitably being defeated in that. But
yes, I've been largely ignoring what Eva's up to here. Yes, I'm trying to pin down the architectural influences there. Does that look like the north of England to you, Tim?
Yeah. The art director for Pokemon Shield originally is from Britain. I think he spent quite a lot of years in Japan, and they increasingly brought him in to work on Pokemon Shield over the course of the project, Pokemon Sword. And I think that I saw some comment that he admitted himself that he tried as far as possible to incorporate bits of, this is what it felt for him growing up in rural England, but that obviously there have had to be some fantasy elements and some compromises just by the nature of and I think we're about to see one right now, which is yes, this is a typical occurrence in Britain, although
yes.
Though, funnily enough, I mean, we do actually have folk who went hunting for a meteorite that fell in the UK not too long back. Also, folk from the university went hunting for them. So yeah, it does have some parallels. But
interesting. This is I suppose technically the first Pokemon released for home console, as in first of the mainline games, by virtue of the fact that it switches both.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that the previous installments, the Let's Go Eevee or the Let's Go Pikachu, were as well received. As far as the core series goes, this seems to be a strong entry.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what has stayed the same, but also what's changed. If you go right the way back to the original on Game Boy and that, I mean, although obviously the art style is fully 3D and you're seeing this wonderful 3D environment, there are certain parallels I'm seeing even in these initial stages of how your adventure progresses, and you start off with your initial rival battle and you've got your starter Pokemon and you build up from there.
It's interesting you mentioned the art style, Tim, because I know that they altered it slightly. Was it second generation maybe, or perhaps when they westernized Red and Blue, although not Green? I believe that they took inspiration from the anime that the game had inspired. So it came full circle. So the look became a little bit more influenced by the cartoons and the comics that were based on the game. Weirdly enough.
That's interesting. It's
And I don't know if you'll be old enough to remember, Tim, of course, but the moral panic that surrounded the original releases, just because there's a bit of a Pokemania, as they called it, and
yes,
it was the usual panic about what it was doing to the children. We will think of the children, but actually, in terms of controversy, it's more or less as a franchise steered clear. But there's been a couple of, one of the more unfortunate, very unfortunate side effects was someone was actually shot and killed playing Pokemon Go. I don't know if you came across that story.
I didn't, but
just a little bit unfortunate, a little bit grim. But the other controversy, which dates back a little bit further to when the cartoon was first airing, I think just in Japan, it actually caused seizures. Something like 600 kids rolling about on the floor, having some sort of epileptic fit or something similar. I can't think of any other particular controversies. It's been well looked after by Game Freak and Nintendo.
Yes, certainly, I think even looking at Pokemon Go, I know there have been various controversies, including, for example, people running the risk of being mugged in particular contexts, of obviously depending on where they're, or going to places where it's not appropriate, be it memorial sites or cemeteries and that, to try and catch Pokemon. And it does raise the question, even in terms of the environment that we see in here, whether there are parallels. Because on the one hand, I mean, all of that tall grass that you see people walking through to find wild Pokemon, if there are that many trainers, at some stage that's got to have some kind of impact on the grass, you'd have thought. Say nothing of catching all of those Pokemon.
Yeah, so you're saying they should model that and deform the grass over time.
Who knows? Who knows? I mean, it's. I mean, the flip side of that I've always wondered is that. I mean, those spaces beyond the boundaries, the fact that there are certain invisible barriers that you can't go past, that there's clearly grass or there's clearly that space beyond, and obviously we know that because it's a game that they haven't modeled everything, and so that's those are the points at the edges of the map, but. I wonder if in the real quote unquote Pokemon world, if that's if there are areas that are out of bounds, off limits, because no, these are Pokemon nature reserves, which I mean we know there are some of those in the anime, but that it's almost a kind of reconciling with the ecosystem, some attempt by the Pokemon world to try and prevent climate. Climate damage, as it were. Who knows? Who knows?
So we've got a question there from George, who talks about the benefits of how Pokemon Go encourage people to come out and explore their real environment. I think the question there is, are there any others that have a similar impact? And I don't think anything has matched the international impact of that. I remember being in, I was in Venice, was it? No, Florence, I think, at its peak, and all surrounded by all this beautiful architecture, and everyone was looking at their phones, chasing Pokemon. But the only other thing I can think of is Pokemon Go's predecessor, Niantic, from the makers of who helped make Pokemon Go, of course. But I think on a smaller scale, it's interesting how these apps, augmented reality apps and games, are used to embellish small pieces of the environment, to help encourage people to explore heritage sites, for example. One of my students this year was developing an app, a gamified app, a murder mystery, to help people encourage people to explore the university campus, for example. But I'm not sure anything can match the impact of Pokemon Go. It was quite a phenomenon.
No, definitely, and I appreciate what you were saying there, Matt, and also what George was saying about the benefits. I realize that often we can concentrate on the challenges of these, and it's
stop the tracks around a wild area, like in a camp.
Oh, now that's lovely.
That is nice, isn't it?
It's
very idyllic.
Yes, and I realised that we missed the representation of trains and that, which were very much trains modelled after trains in Britain, albeit that they were actually running all of them on time, which is well, so far, which is
on-time trains and no rain. It's just ludicrous fantasy world.
I know.
What's happening here, Eva? Can you?
She is the professor's granddaughter, and we saw this really crazy Pokemon in the foggy woods when we were saving a Pokemon. So, she's trying to find out about it so that her grandma will actually see that she has talent.
Very good.
Yeah.
To fish and camp right in the wild outdoors.
Yeah. There's also there is an element of continuing the sort of the research legacy here. I know that a lot of the emphasis is on the trainers and that, but there's also the question of, well, where do the professors come from? I mean, they have to, there have to be folk who are studying. So whether she's a Pokemon PhD student or a Pokemon postdoc, it's a strange thing, actually. Literally, the entire society, I mean, at least from what I've seen, a lot of the jobs, apart from the service industries that obviously, or the retail industries, a lot of them seem to be based around the poke economy, as it were. And I don't know what effect that has on this coexistence between, on the one hand, the towns that you see in the distance, and then all this greenery and that in terms of the environmental impact. I wonder if that's something that also regulates it.
Yeah, I suggest they might need to diversify their economy for one thing. So, but it is all remarkably pristine.
I mean, whether that changes when we reach the towns. I think we've just seen a bit of a weather effect there.
Not sure what our player is up to here.
It's doing something weird. I'm trying to come back.
Okay. Sorry, what was the weather effect, Tim?
Oh, it seemed to have switched suddenly to snowing, and I think just the moment. Is I think with the transition, it's probably a case of switching between regions, and I dare say that the weather perhaps it seems a particularly extreme switch going from one place to bring bright sunshine to suddenly being in the middle of snow, though that in itself maybe has we see.
Yes,
because it certainly wasn't that a moment ago. So you but then that's also a metaphor in some ways for climate change in its own way, and the idea that the climate can shift rapidly, albeit in this case it's because of a game loading mechanic that it's moving from one area to another, as it were. Yes, with shaking a tree. It's because one of the difficult things, of course, with the Pokemon world is that you shake a tree, and before you know it, the tree shakes you back, which is something you have to be careful of.
Yes,
a pseudo-wudo or something.
Shaking trees is a tried and tested game mechanic, isn't it? Many a game I've shaken or run into and headbutted a tree to get some goodies.
It looks like ice cream.
Living ice cream.
It's the stuff of nightmares.
Yes, I think that very much moves on from the tree conversation. It's one thing when Pokemon are modeled after wild animals or even domestic pets, but when it's modeled after food, then it
starts to get weird.
Yeah.
Just vanilla in there. This ice cream.
Yes, we're just talking about it.
And even the concept of the Pokeball, I think on one level it seems very much, oh, this is there's the harmony here, but then on the other hand, you think to yourself, you're catching these things and putting them in really small, sort of enclosed containers. I mean,
that has bothered me, and indeed it bothered PETA, as in the animal cruelty charity. They took Nintendo and Game Freak to task on this, saying that it encouraged animal cruelty. Which is perhaps a step beyond where I would go, but it is a bit unsettling seeing them squeezing out those little balls.
Yes, I mean and certainly because one doesn't necessarily know the level of awareness that there is. I mean, is it almost like being in? It's not, because it's not like being in stasis. There's some sort of awareness there, though.
Even more horrific.
Yeah. Though in some cases, I think the effects were not always contained. I remember that when Ash caught a muck during the first season, the smell actually came through the Pokeball, which was, so it suggests that, this is not entirely a something that is able to isolate the Pokemon from the outside world. And from an environmental perspective, I also found it really interesting on the occasions when a Pokemon refuses to leave the ball. There was a particular episode where Digletts and Dugtrios were blocking the construction of a dam, and trainers were called in to deal with them, and the Pokemon refused to battle them. They refused to even leave the balls. And the it later turned out that the Biglets and Dugtrios were protecting a natural environment that would be destroyed by the dam. So they were environmental. They were conserving the environment, and the Pokemon were in solidarity with them. They sort of defied their human owners in saying, "No, this is not a good thing. You know, and you really need to recognize this." And
Yes.
I just found that as an interesting way of seeing that the Pokemon, there is that sense of almost an awareness or of the balance in terms of nature, and almost a feeling with some of them that look, you can do certain things, but we're not going to help you do this because it's clearly wrong. And I don't know the extent to which that's replicated in other parts, but certainly that's one episode that really stood out to me, thinking about it.
Yes, I think the caging of the animals to protect them. There's something about that that's. I read somewhere that it sort of speaks to the kind of like Western ideals of conservation. It's like we love nature, but we're going to lock it up. You know, it's a bit of a tension there, I think. You could say that it's exploiting nature, because at the end of the day, if you have a ball that you can put your Pokemon into, you're the one with the upper hand. You're the one in control. The animals aren't, so it's not a two-way street.
Yes. Yes, and the very nature of it is an acquisitions-based system. You are encouraged to. I mean, the very phrase "gotta catch 'em all." I mean, it's almost. I know we've put "gotta grow 'em all" or "gotta," you could say "got to save them all," as it were. But
yes, there's a sort of consumerist capitalist underpinning to the whole enterprise. Not quite as egregious as Tom Nook in Animal Crossing, but parallels.
Yeah.
They're I think it's this iteration. I think it's Sword and Shield. They actually have a climate change influenced Pokemon. There was one that I can't remember its name. It was made out of coral. But now, because of rising temperatures in the oceans and so on, it's been replaced by a sort of a ghost, to imply that Pokemon is now extinct because of climate change. Because it's
Yes, it's sort of bleached coral. I think it was Corsola. It might have
Corsola.
been.
Yeah, I was just looking it up. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
In some ways, it's strange that they haven't had more to say. It's clear, given its environmentalist roots. With Dr. Bug, as he was called, the creator, he there's a real opportunity here when you have the attention of so many people, young and old, to say something about climate change, perhaps.
It's. I suppose in some ways it. Excuse me. It also depends on how things shape up in the towns as well, because I know at the moment we're in the midst of a wild area that even within, even seeing how that's presented, I have read one or two things about there being representations of pollution or the impact of the factories and the industrialization within the game. Though
yes.
how obvious that is, or what story is told from that, I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, at this point, but
yeah, I think there are certainly Pokemon that present as evil, if you like, insofar as they do, that are made out of polluting factories. They look like one of them looks like a little polluting factory, little sort of smokestacks coming out. That's definitely positioned as a bad thing.
Yeah,
but
and it's yeah. And it's also strange in terms of it's interesting to say that, Matt, in terms of the representation of the sort of the good and evil dynamic within the Pokemon, because there are certain Pokemon we would perhaps identify as evil because they are the ones that Team Rocket or different teams would be using. I think that the classic example is Ekans and Coughing in the originally, and then they evolve into Arbok and Weezing in the Galar region, as you say, having the sort of the smokestack top hat design, and but flip side of that would be, I think, as Ekans sort of says at one point, in one of these episodes where the Pokemon are talking to each other and we're getting a translation, Ekans is only evil because Master is evil, as it were. And so it was this interesting idea of the extent to which the Pokemon are acting according to the wishes of whoever has caught them, whoever their owner is. And I think with the Galar wheezing, something that I came across, and I don't know whether this is the case or not, but there was a suggestion that it takes in pollutants into its body and then expels clean air so it's actually serving a purifying function. And when I read that, I thought that is completely not what, had I not read that text, I would never have had any inclination of that. And I think it reflects in some ways that there are processes going on in the natural environment that are of animals we may instinctively recoil from, but that are helping to preserve that environment, as it were. It's so yeah. Yeah, I mean, even something like Ninjask, which I would probably run away from, as it looks very much like a ninja wasp, which is the worst possible combination for me. But I mean, that'll be doing its bit for the environment, and it's all part of this ecosystem that's evolved and balanced through that, as it were.
Yes. It makes me think of what George's point earlier about Pokemon Go encouraging people to go out and explore their environments, but also there's probably something to be said for the games encouraging a sort of an environmental outlook or an ecological outlook. If you think, I remember when Pokemon Go was at its height, there was something crazy like in the first few weeks, people had collected more data than on these fictional animals and fictional ecologies than hundreds of scientists could possibly analyze. So it was, if you could somehow piggyback on the back of something like Pokemon Go and direct it towards real life problems, real life species. And I know there's efforts to count the bees and count moths and butterflies, that kind of a thing. But if you had the engagement that Pokemon Go had, you'd catalog them all.
Absolutely, the gamification of environmental and ecological research. I mean, it certainly raises exciting possibilities, albeit with the caveat of the potential challenges and how you navigate around those.
Yes, yeah. There's also something to bear in mind about the fact that all of this stuff is, what we're doing right now is currently producing carbon. The streaming, the console, everyone's devices. So it's not by default a carbon neutral pastime in the first place if we're thinking environmentally.
Yes, no, definitely, and we'll be, one of the events or activities we've got coming up over the autumn is a carbon cost calculathon to try and crowdsource something of that carbon footprint of gaming. So it'll be interesting to see what the return is on that. And
yes. I think it hadn't had the impact that Pokemon Go's had in the numbers, but I think it was Columbia University started using Pokemon Go to teach ecology students, possibly, how to catalog biodiversity, like I was just talking about. But obviously that's very isolated, probably a small class, with limited impact. But I have to look and see if that's ever been written up as a something that can be replicated.
That's interesting to hear. I hadn't come across that.
So what's happening, Eva?
I just switched out an old move to a different move because I don't like the moves that just take away defense or add defense, because I find them a waste of time. I just want to destroy the enemy.
Right. Yeah, it's very environmentally sound. You just want to destroy. Interesting.
I want to destroy climate change.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to hear the sort of from a trainer's eye view and the sort of the philosophy there as we because I think that it's it's it gives more of a sense of sort of the feelings that folk are going through potentially as they're exploring a Pokemon world. And yeah.
Got another comment from George here. He remembers there are some examples of human manufactured or human edited Pokemon, such as Mewtwo. Have to be further instances of this sort of thing. Yeah, I think so. Mewtwo, he keeps popping up, and again, he's presented as a bad thing. So I think that that's an ongoing theme. The only other example I can think of is that I can't remember the name of it, the one with the smokestacks, the kind of the Pokemon that have been the result of, I presume, experimentation with industry and by industry, and have resulted in bad things. But I think what you touch on there, George, is something. It highlights the potential and the underutilized potential that these games could have to bring these things to light. Because it's, it would be hard to sort of shift focus and do more with a character like Mewtwo or related characters. Tim, are you aware of anything along those lines? I'm drawing a blank.
Good question. I did see a couple of images which suggest that there's actually a character later on in this game who does combine certain fossils from different Pokemon and merges them into somewhat Frankensteinian creations, and that this is something of it was a representation of the scientific experimentation in the past and what that potentially led to in this area. And I think there's also the situation in which Pokemon, even if they already existed, they've been changed by urban environments, as you suggested, Matt, with the smokestack Pokemon, who I think is probably the Galar variant of Weezing. And I know that even things like some of the things like Grimer and Muck, or possibly there's one called Trubbish, which I think is a rubbish type Pokemon, and this one they exist and feed off of rubbish and waste. So there is that, and so yes, I think that there are those that have there are those that have been created directly by people, but there's also perhaps more widespread those where urban environments have impacted. And yet it's always been interesting to me in the game, the fact that cities and wild areas, there's a very clear separation. There's seemingly no boundary, no defenses as such to prevent wild Pokemon from just wandering into town. And we know from the anime and that there are wild Pokemon within towns and in urban areas. But certainly in the games, there's very much that dichotomy, that separation. Town is a space that is reserved for people and captured Pokemon, as it were, domesticated Pokemon. I hesitate to use that word in the context of the game. Now, obviously, to some degree, that's a mechanic. It's a safe space in which you can heal up your Pokemon. You're not just going to run into trainers or have to battle, unless there's a sort of special cases in that. But it also does perhaps create something of that separation between countryside and urban environment. I don't know.
Yeah. There might be something to that. There was an interesting comment here from Lyle that kind of chimes with what you were saying about Muck and Grimer. This idea that they have that sort of luminescence, that there's a different variation that might be a response to their environment. Again, it's quite subtle, but I think an interesting idea, and one that would be nice if they explored a little bit more directly in the game, perhaps.
Yes, no, definitely. It's the sort of thing where if you can either find it through the flavor text, or you can find it through the actual game itself. It's the extent to which you are presented with it directly, or whether it's maybe more something you find later on. So
yeah, I don't think there's quite the Dark Souls level of lore. You know, you get those obtruse kind of references to what's going on, and have to piece it together yourself. But there's probably, I mean, there has to be multiple environmental readings of Pokemon, I imagine. But I'm not aware of any official explanation for the luminescence that certain Pokemon have.
Yes.
But even the ways in which the battles themselves have evolved is that there's almost I know that there's the whole question of the extent to which there are rules governing the behavior within a Pokemon world of how people, you know, what you can and cannot do, and certainly there seems to be an aversion to cruelty against Pokemon, which is a positive thing to see. Obviously, what constitutes cruelty is perhaps more varied depending on. Oh, that's a pelican. Sorry, I was just distracted by the. But yeah. So I think that there is that, and even the battles themselves. The idea that you battle a Pokemon until it faints, or until your Pokemon faints, however fainting is defined.
Yes.
There's never any sense of you are attempting to destroy the Pokemon in that regard, unless you are potentially a sort of a supervillain. And even the worst of the supervillains, it's usually either destroying the world, or conquering it, or stealing Pokemon to exploit them as part of the poke economy. It's probably need to think of a better word than a poke economy.
I like it. I like it.
But no, it's like the gig economy, only more Pokemon centered.
See now, you see that now. No, yeah. Don't over-explain it. I think it's good.
Well, I wonder what that. In fact, I can see we're coming up on the. Oh dear! Now that is terrifying.
Yes.
I mean, you know, sort of the. I mean,
Yeah, that's just not right.
A large rabbit with hands on its ears that can just rapidly sort of sneak up on you. I mean, this is and has laser eye focus. I mean, this is not your. It really challenges the sort of stereotypes of the sweet sort of, you know, bunny rabbit creature as a pet. Mind you, so does Bugs Bunny in practically every subversion of the you know, the rabbit or the hare, depending on, or cross between them. In case in point, that thing packs a punch, as we can see on screen. And
that's just, I honestly, I was worried about the 10-year-old here encountering the Demogorgon in Stranger Things. That thing is much more terrifying.
Yeah.
George has said there's in the first generation of Pokemon games, one of the Pokemon was killed by Team Rocket, and that was presented as a bad thing. So there is, I guess they were keen to differentiate between the fainting and the killing. It does still, it's antagonistic, you know. It's a relationship you have with these things. It's still there's conflict, you know.
Yes. I wonder how different the Pokemon world and the Pokemon environment would be if it wasn't centered around battles. Because in a sense, I mean, there are Pokemon in these universes that are used, for example, for different purposes. I mean, Growlithe and Arcanine tend to be police dogs. Chansey tends to serve in a medical capacity in Pokemon centers. You find, I think, even some of the fighting type Pokemon being used as construction workers. I mean, it's almost there is almost a sense of animals being used for these different roles. But then you've also conversely got them being used in fighting. Whereas if, for example, I mean, dog fighting and, you know, rooster fighting, in that is something which, even if it's happened in the past, is something that now we would generally regard with revulsion at the idea of,
Yeah, that was the parallel that PETA were making in their argument against it. That it looked like dog fighting and cockfighting, and I don't know if it's necessarily teaching people a bad lesson. I think most kids, and certainly one would hope all adults, are able to differentiate, between a fantasy video game and reality. But I still can't get over that thing. It's
utterly terrifying.
Mesmerizingly terrifying.
Yes, and that's probably one of the less terrifying.
Yeah, I think if it wasn't all based around battles, one thing is the environment wouldn't have these convenient, flat, empty spaces for battles. It's that's one change we might see.
Oh, so where are we now? We seem to be looking. Are we? If you turn around by any chance, are we at?
Eva, could you turn around and just look at what's behind you? Right.
What have we here?
Pokémon Shield.
Yes, this is definitely a typical scene in Britain. You just find people just sort of standing there with all their gear, helping you to start your first ever. Do you want to set up a tent and go sort of camping in the wilderness? Oh yes, this is completely typical as you go throughout the UK. I'm being facetious, of course, but yeah.
Do you think curries? That's a reference? Is that to their popularity in Britain?
Good question. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's
certainly Manchester, Glasgow would that would be a fairly commonplace thing, a curry.
Yes, it's also interesting. You've got watts as a currency. Whether that's not a reference to James Watt and the steam engine. I think I'm stretching.
We might be reaching. I think we both are at this point, but
we are.
It's a nice idea.
But no, I mean, it is worth thinking about. This is still a monetary based economy, and it is something that is, even if some of the services are involving Pokemon, and I think we're entering Motostoke, which is, I'm guessing this is a cross between, simply from the name, Manchester, Stoke-on-Trent, some of the different. I mean, I'm told from what I've read that there's no real immediate logic, that there are lots of different elements of towns combined. And yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that this is partly a representation of either industrial, post-industrial cities.
I mean, I would buy that, yes. I mean, you've got the water wheels, and this could, I suppose, be inspired by the industrial north of England. You would know better than me, Tim. It looks, I could buy that.
It's, I mean, equally in a different time, it could have also been the industrial heart of Glasgow as well. I think, particularly out in terms of some of the, if you had more in the way of the shipping and the
yes
facilities on the Clyde.
I think it was the red brick that made me think, that put me off. Yeah, it's not sandstone. I don't know. I'm reaching again here, but whereas that's very classic Glasgow. That building. Yes, there's another commercial element to it.
So is that a Pokemon literally acting as an information terminal?
That's horrific. Is that a Pokemon there? That thing there on the left, that machine?
No, it's not a Pokemon.
It's not a Pokemon?
No, it's technology. Okay. Don't worry.
Apparently we're okay.
Yeah.
It's the same technology as my phone. It's the Rotom character. I'll show you.
Okay.
Oh, okay. but no, even the cultural combinations. I mean, you've got the Pokemon Center, you've got a shop directly adjacent to it. So.
It's my phone.
Oh, okay, right.
It's like Apple or Samsung.
Ah, and you've also got what appears to look like a popular drinking establishment directly next to the shop and the Pokemon Center, because of course that yes, I think we
Ever
are.
drink and catch.
But even that perhaps says something about the environment, the idea that there's a combination of all these different places in one setting, sort of efficient use of space.
Yes.
I don't know, but that's maybe an overstatement when you see the size of the buildings. And
it's black. It's black.
I realize that obviously, given the nature of the place, we've probably we've talked about the various things in terms of the mechanics and in terms of the world itself, even visually and in terms of sound. I think the environments and the way they are represented, there's obviously a very bright and cheery atmosphere to them, and I think that may be in the show. Obviously, to some degree, that's reflecting anime culture and games culture, but it can also affect how we perceive the Pokemon environment, as it were. So
yeah, it's very much still a Japanese game, I would say. So much so that I think originally Nintendo didn't want to release it in the West. They thought it would be it wouldn't go down well. They thought the kids would want something a bit more action oriented. And so they had to be persuaded, which I'm probably quite glad they did in the end.
Imagine so, yeah. And because of course with each generation you've got more and more new Pokemon emerging, and which is obviously great from a marketing perspective, and also from the perspective of, oh yes, I've got this new set of challenges. Though it's maybe a little sad in some ways that you're finding that there are more and more species emerging in the Pokemon world, while more and more species in the real world are facing the added challenges, as it were. It's almost though that's not to say that there aren't Pokemon that are rare or are potentially facing extinction. We just maybe don't hear about those as much. And
we haven't really explored the wider media landscape. We touched on the TV show a little bit. I think I mentioned briefly the anime, and there's also the trading card game, of course, which I believe is still going strong. So it's funny. It's a very far-reaching franchise. Of course, there was the Detective Pikachu movie as well a couple of years ago with oh gosh, I've forgotten his name. Who was the voice of Pikachu?
Pikachu.
Yes.
There's also a TV show.
Wasn't Ryan Reynolds, was it?
I don't know. It's I suppose in some ways there's this feeling in which we are, I was about to say we are all Pikachu, but I think that takes the conversation to a slightly more meta and philosophical level. We are all, it's sort of, be the Pokemon, sort of be the Pokemon, as it were. But yeah, and no, I mean, you've got,
I looked this up before we started, but the anime has also resulted in nearly, I think they're coming up in their 20th feature-length movie, which is outrageous. You think that's just
I mean,
it's never really gone out of favor. Sorry, Tim, what were you going to say?
No. Certainly in terms of longevity, it's right up there, and in terms of popularity, I mean, I can't think in terms of films and franchises with environmental themes. Studio Ghibli is probably the next that would be most popularly known in the West, and that has had that in some ways even more of a direct underpinning. And for all that we've talked about the different limitations of environmental presentation in Pokemon Shield, I think it does still, as you were saying earlier, there is still a lot in the way of environmental themes throughout it, whether it be in the anime or in the games, as it were. And,
The mention of Ghibli there is evoking for me Ni no Kuni, which is obviously a collaboration with Studio Ghibli. Though lacking some of the thematic heft, I think, of the Ghibli movies, it was still felt Ghibli-esque, you know.
Yes. I think what we're seeing here is we're seeing the poke economy at its height with the corporate sponsors on the back of that man's cape. I mean, you couldn't get more on them if you tried. Yeah, so Pokemon advertising is something that is very much in universe as well, including some of the posters we saw further back. But
yes,
yeah.
Well, we're coming up on time there. It's been a fairly low-key chat. It's been of interest, but I'm still gonna have nightmares about that big bunny thing. That's for me. That's the main takeaway.
Oh my goodness.
Ooh. Well, that's certainly not something you see every day. Just that rotating to different levels. So.
This guy's very excited.
Yes, and stadiums. I mean, I saw a couple of the screenshots. I'm guessing that with the stadia, you've got it's paralleling, of course, the football stadiums around the UK, which is something that's really big, obviously, in the different nations in the and that. So and I think that is something of a change. Whereas previously the gyms were more in the style of almost a martial arts training type setting, and it was very sort of small, very close space in terms of people being together. Whereas this, it's much more a large scale spectator sport with large crowds.
The opening sequence of this game shows that off nicely. It's like Super Bowl or something. It's kind of goes beyond even a British football stadium, and perhaps even more like American style bombast.
And that in itself changes the environmental equation as well, because suddenly you've no longer got these the individual travelers. You've also got you already had an infrastructure, but suddenly that economy the infrastructure is also not just supporting the people who are going directly on these Pokemon journeys, but all these large crowds that are watching them directly, and not even just at the very end, at the special, this is the finals, this is the Elite Four or the equivalent, but rather right from the get-go, every gym match is suddenly a mass spectator event, and obviously you've got all the people going to those mass spectator events. It makes you wonder whether other sports are actually of any popularity at all in the Pokemon universe, or whether they've just been subsumed.
Probably just.
I think it's always subsumed. Everything from academia to entertainment has given into Pokemon, I think.
Yeah.
We should probably wrap it up there. We've just gone 4 o'clock. Any final thoughts, Tim?
Well, I think first of all to say many thanks to Eva and to Matt for all your work in sort of setting up and supporting the technical side of this this virtual field trip, and also many thanks to all those who've joined us who may be watching this later on YouTube. And if you're interested in other activities or events that we've got coming up, then do feel free to check out the U of G Games Lab or Games and Gaming Lab We are on Twitter. We've got our webpage, our YouTube channel, various different online fora, and we're hoping to run different events in the autumn around the COP26. And we would, in that regard, similarly encourage you to check out the Dear Green Bothy at the university, who are running lots of different events which are environmentally related, and not just limited to games, though some of them are. And we're happy with both. So yeah, that's great.
Great. Okay, I will. I'll pull the plug here, and thanks everyone. Thanks, Tim.
Bye.
Bye, folks.